Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the Agent State. This is a podcast about AI, crypto, and the autonomous systems that are going to design our future. My name is Karan Karia. I'm joined by my co-host Fed. Fed, how you doing?
Hey there, yo. Um, yeah, co-founder of Flow AI and organizer of the AI NYC, a community of researcher, engineers, and founders in New York. And now, host of the Agent State, co-host
Amazing.
of the Agent State.
Amazing. I am very happy to introduce our first guest, Trent McConaghy. Trent is the founder of Ocean Protocol. Trent, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Great to be here.
And we have our second guest as well, just joined. Nader, how you doing, Nader? Welcome.
Hey, great. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Hey, man.
Yeah, of course. Welcome, guys. So for our very first show, we want to discuss a very kind of, a range of topics. It's a really interesting time, both in AI and in Web3. It's been a pretty crazy last 3 months, especially kind of in the intersection of those two spaces. So I'm really excited to have both of you on here. I think we'll first start with kind of what Trent's been working on and in the whole world of AI and prediction markets. So Trent, maybe if you want to give a little bit of an introduction as to yourself, to Ocean Protocol, and what you guys are building.
Sure. So I've been working on AI professionally since the 90s. I started off working for National Defense in Canada, which isn't a big defense organization compared to other countries, of course. Doing AI there, back then, there was very few companies working on AI, so I was overjoyed that someone would pay me to work on AI. And then from that, I started a company doing AI for analog circuit design, creative design of analog circuits. And built that up and sold it in 2004. So that was my sort of first feather in my hat. And then simultaneously started two new projects, another company for verification of integrated circuits, analog, digital memory, using AI under the hood as well. And then at the same time doing a PhD in creative analog circuit design, just a really interesting space. I'm trained as an electrical engineer and computer scientist. So to me, I always loved AI, high impact technology, really interesting algorithms, a lot of interesting directions to go. And obviously the profound potential impact, the philosophical ideas, all that. There's, AI has it all, right? And along the way too, I followed other things, AI, like augmented reality, virtual reality, brain-computer interfaces, and all this. I'm a big nerd, and that's what led me to learn about Bitcoin. I think first in 2010, bought a few in 2011, not enough. And then as around the time my second company had got profitable, I started really diving into blockchain a lot more, had just moved to Berlin, discovered an amazing community there, people talking about blockchain, not just Bitcoin, but about blockchain. This was 2013 era. And so that led me and a couple co-founders to start working on NFTs on top of Bitcoin in 2013, and really zooming in on solving the problem, how do you collect digital art? So working very closely with artists, creating digital art, and collectors trying to collect them, and then helping them to secure their art, etc. And that went pretty well, pretty decent traction, but not enough to, we got a seed funding and stuff, but not enough to really get Series A. And so we pivoted. We briefly did some work on decentralized databases, wrapping MongoDB with Tendermint BFT. But that was really towards enterprises, and they weren't ready for blockchain. So come 2017, I was really missing working on AI. And at the same time, loving crypto, because like the blockchain algorithms are also really interesting. And if you're in AI and discover the algorithms of crypto, there's a lot of overlap, or vice versa. So these two fields, from a technical perspective, there's a lot of interesting back and forth and back and forth. In 2016, I started writing about this stuff, things like AI DAOs, which these days basically are called agents, including, speculating what the first AI millionaire could look like, fully sovereign bots that own themselves, control themselves, make their own decisions, create things, sell them, etc., and make money. And also started writing about more practical, direct applications. And in that case, how can blockchain help AI? And on that ladder, all roads pointed to decentralized data markets. And I'd seen this in the AI space where, friends and colleagues of mine were having a hell of a time getting their hands on AI training data to train their models. And, yet at the same time, the AI world had recognized the unreasonable effectiveness of data. Google published a paper on that in 2007 on exactly that point, where it's kind of embarrassing. It's this literally bitter lesson where instead of needing, someone working for 3 years, 6 years on a PhD to advance, accuracy of some model on some problem, all you needed was more compute, right? More data, more compute, et cetera, and you get better results. And we're seeing, Google started having that play out in the mid 2000s, and we're seeing that play out more and more throughout the 2010s and now. Anyway, we saw all this and we said, hey, maybe blockchain can help. And that's what led to doing Ocean Protocol, which we launched in 2017, where the heart of it was think like a DEX, but focusing on buying and selling data. And in order to do a good job in that, we had to make it where the data itself could easily be assets. So we have access control under the hood. Think like if you're in Google Drive and you right click to share to someone an email, that's sort of basically giving someone access to that file, right? That PDF or whatever it is that you're sharing. So imagine you can do something like that, but without Google as the middleman, and it's just decentralized mediation. And this is really what Ocean Protocol has at the core, and it's all tokenized with NFTs and ERC20s and stuff. So having one ERC20 for token for a given data set gives you access to that data set or data feed or whatever it is. So anyway, we built this in Ocean, and by about 2020, we had shipped really everything we aimed for in the white paper. We had a DEX. In fact, the DEX is interesting. When we saw pump.fund come out, basically clicks, people can launch a token, and then there's explicitly no utility or value, but it's very low friction. We had actually built something like that in 2020 called Ocean Market, but there was utility. You can very easily take a data set and launch it as a token, an NFT plus ERC20, and then immediately put it into an AMM where people can speculate on it, pump and dump it, whatever. And this actually happened. And within about 3 weeks, we had about $50 million volume. And at first we didn't like this because we were trying, we're not promoting speculation or anything. But then friends of mine said, Trent, this is really good because you put up the AMMs for automatic price discovery, and speculation is a key part of that. So we got over it and realized this is a good thing. And then we're off to the races. So that was in 2020. In the years since that time, what we've been doing in Ocean is refining that, adding more features to handle privacy, things like bringing compute to data such that your data doesn't leave the premises if you don't want it to, supporting other privacy preserving technologies, working with chains like Oasis that have it directly, and then also building more applications on top. Once you have an access control protocol for data, then there can be lots of interesting applications on top. When I say data, maybe for your audience, it's pretty general, but to zoom in, it's really a tuning towards AI data. So, and in this case, it's all the way along the cycle for AI modeling, from raw data to feature vectors, to train models, to predictions. Every single one of those can be viewed as a data asset. So you can use Ocean Market or fork your own very easily to say have a decentralized marketplace for AI models, right? Very straightforwardly, or for predictions, and Ocean makes this really easy. With all the IP affordances below to handling copyright, all that, et cetera. We actually had legal advice, et cetera, on this going back to the Ascribe days, the NFTs. So and then that since about 2021, 2022, we've given ourselves space to basically ship and explore various potential applications. Also, we've had grants programs and stuff, have grants programs for people to build things on top and help to catalyze that. And one that is near and dear to my heart, something I've been working on a lot, is something called Ocean Predictor, which is crowdsourced time series prediction. You can view it as a prediction market, but a bit different than the traditional ones. A traditional prediction market is where it asks the question, and maybe that question gets resolved in like 3 months or a year, like, will the Democrats win or Republicans win the election, right? That's a famous one. And then, people can speculate on the yes, like yes to Democrats or yes to Republicans. And then at the end, when it gets resolved, one side wins, the other side loses. But imagine instead of that, you have something like, will Bitcoin go up in 5 minutes, yes or no, right? And of course, you could just do that, but people can put their money where their mouth is and speculate yes or no. But how do you make this interesting for traders? And what we did was we said, okay, people can speculate, but the feed itself, the aggregate signal, is not public. Instead, it's private, and if you want to see it, then you have to pay for it. It's about $1 per feed per day. Will Bitcoin USDT pair on Binance go up or down? Yes or no, 5 minutes from now. Same thing for all top 10 tokens, right? And so that's kind of we call it a prediction market or an iterated prediction market. We call them prediction feeds because they really start to look like time series, right? Because it's the same question every 5 minutes. Will Bitcoin USDT go up or down? Yes or no, yes or no, yes or no. And yeah, so we built and shipped this in about a year and a half ago, and had a sponsor on it too. And it's doing about $100 million volume a month in staking trading.
Wow.
So it's had more than $2 billion volume over the last year and a half. So, we saw what was going on with the poly market. We thought that's pretty cool. We have higher, but we just aren't beating our chest about it. But, steady surely. And the key thing though, is if you're a trader, why would you want this? Well, you would input this into your trading algorithm as alpha, right? So your trading bot does its thing, whatever, maybe you've got some model building, maybe you've got some take profit, stop loss, whatever too, all that. And you can use this as extra alpha. You could do a naive trading. If it says up, then you buy and sell 5 minutes later. And if it says down, then you sell and buy 5 minutes later. But you can obviously get much faster than that too, getting towards options contracts, futures, etc. And anyway, so that's the story of Predictor. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was playing around with it earlier today, and I had no idea about the volume numbers. So that's amazing. And there's so much I want to get into there, from doing NFTs on Bitcoin in 2013. Like that's like I think that's pre-colored coins, or it's like colored coins time, to like national defense. But I want to let Nader jump in here and introduce himself and kick it off from there.
Hey, sure. I'm Nader. I'm the Director of Developer Relations for Eigen Labs, which is the protocol behind EigenLayer. I've been building an AI since around 2022, and I've been a software developer since, I guess, for about 12 or 13 years. Worked in mobile, I've worked in cloud, I've done full stack web development, and I've been doing blockchain crypto for the last 4 years or so. Some of the stuff I've done in AI so far is I built an app that when I launched it, just went insane. Hundreds of thousands of users per day. Infrastructure costs started ramping up like immediately, thousands of dollars per day. And I knew I needed to either like raise some money and scale it or just sell it. So I decided to do the latter because I had a full-time job. I was working for Aave at the time. So within about a month, I sold the app and the company. So it was kind of a whirlwind 30 days, but it was my first time building something in AI. And it was a really, really fun and exciting experience. So ever since then, I've kind of been really diving in a lot more. I also created React Native AI, which is a mobile AI framework. It's been used by a lot of like Fortune 500 companies and just general developers building mobile apps. And I also have launched an app called AI Buddy that at one point was doing a little over $1,000 a month in revenue in the App Store. Nothing crazy, but fun experiment. Yeah, and then at Eigen Labs and EigenLayer, we're just seeing a ton of interest, adoption, and mind share really within AI, and specifically around verifiable AI. So we've been going deeper and deeper there, supporting more and more companies building their products with EigenLayer. And it's just been something that's been really fun to kind of dive into. It's kind of the bleeding edge of AI, in my opinion, especially I would say within the aspect of like how crypto and AI might be able to kind of interact or have some type of synergy around verifiable AI is kind of like a deep rabbit hole.
So many things to talk about here. Where do we start? So Nader, I know you've been going down into the rabbit hole of the TEE and the verifiability. Maybe it could be interesting. Yeah, since you just were mentioning that, it could be interesting to like better understand how that works. I remember in the Cabal channel for the demo day that you organized, we were talking about, we need verifiability, and I was like, one of my points was like, well, yes, we do, but the public right now don't give a shit about like privacy or about like verifiability or about knowing that it's coming from an agent, because I mean, DeepSeek is being used by millions of people, giving data basically to like a company that will collect all this data. then you have all these like meme coin, and people just have zero trust. So I'd be curious to hear how the TEE will change the trust model, and go as
Yeah, I think
technical
it
as you
comes down
can.
to, like you said, the users don't really care about a lot of these implementation details that we kind of talk about. They're more interested in kind of the unlock, like what can the application do and what are the features that it can provide to me. And then often those features are uniquely enabled by crypto primitives. So specific to TEEs, for instance, yeah. So we were just in Stanford last weekend for the Tree Hacks Hackathon, which is one of the oldest hackathons in the United States, maybe in the world. Over I think 10 or 11,000 students sign up for it, and around 1,000 or so are given admission. So these are kind of like the 1,000 most cracked developers from some of the most sought after schools around North America. So there was a lot of students from like University of Waterloo and Yale and Harvard and like Stanford. And it was interesting to hear some of their ideas. But one of the ideas that someone was pitching was they wanted to have an application that enabled two founders to connect with each other that had similar ideas, but they didn't want to expose the ideas to the public. But they wanted to have a platform that kind of did private matchmaking, really. And this is just one of the use cases of private matchmaking. We'll be finding like a technical co-founder with an idea guy or something like that had the same idea, but they wanted to kind of find someone to work on them together. That's just one example of like what that could be used for. So one of the ways that you could do that would be through a trusted execution environment. And then within that trusted execution environment, you could also be running some type of LLM where you kind of have the input is this information that's provided by the user. And then if there's a match, you can kind of decide that within a trusted execution environment. So that's just like one example. I mean, I guess the whole idea is just having a place to run code that is both, and it's hard to kind of distinguish between trustless and trusted because we use both of those almost in the same way, but but we're trying to kind of basically say that you should not need to trust the system that you're working in, right? Like that's kind of the whole idea with a lot of crypto primitives. I think
you're muted. Yeah. So this is super interesting. Yeah, Fed, go ahead. I think you had a question.
Yeah. I was like for the matchmaking between like founders of different places and ideas. I think you could do that as well with probably embeddings and doing like cosine similarity. I wonder if that also was part of that because it sounds
there
like
was a couple of ideas that we had around how they could do that using like ZK proofs, trust execution environment. There's a few different techniques.
Yeah. And cool, awesome. And so what's the state of TEE today? Because I've been hearing a lot about it, but I'm not seeing and right now there's so much noise in the AI space that it's impossible to follow everything and to know what's the which projects are real and not. And I know you've been with a finger on the pulse with the demo day, so you've been like seeing a bunch of like different projects. So what's any project that you see in the TE space that actually is working?
Automated Network is doing pretty well. Like they seem to be pretty far along. But I think what's interesting about T's is that people that are essentially like into that get really, really into it. Like something must click where they kind of really, really get kind of pilled on them, which is really interesting to me because I kind of see the value proposition, but I've never been someone that's been like ultra pilled on that. But when you see other people kind of realize something, there's always something there. So it's always been on my radar. I feel like the ultimate like opportunity for building and unlocking a primitive at scale is essentially the developer experience. So I couldn't say I want to go build a trust execution environment myself and spin it up and run something in like 30 minutes. I don't think like we're there yet in terms of that developer experience and the primitives and the systems that need to kind of be in place for that. So I think that means we're still a little bit early. So I think we need a little more maturity in terms of the developer tooling. and make it to where anyone can build an experiment and essentially like run their own ideas a lot easier. I think you saw that there's still kind of like a very high barrier to entry.
Yeah.
So in that same vein, actually, like I'd love to know from your experience in the demo days, from your experience talking to these developers, like where are you finding that next level unlock in whether it be the developer experience or whether it be on the consumer side, even. I don't think we've seen really anything on the consumer side, but within this kind of like crossover in AI and crypto, like where are you seeing that like in the early stages? Because I do think it's still very early days.
Yeah, you just have the technology evolving and improving over time, and then sometimes you have someone that just sees and realizes an opportunity and builds something that is kind of like a 10x improvement over what existed before. So I think Foundry was like a good example for like developer tooling that was like a next level. I think that the ELIZA framework was kind of like a big step forward for being able to kind of open the door for a lot of developers to build like agents, for example. So you have these big 10x type of innovations that come, and they get better and better and better, and then over time you have now like multiple ways and multiple tools that you can build with, more experimentation, more possibility to find product market fit. So I think we're just kind of seeing that. That's always been the case, though. That's been how it's always been in software since I've been here. I remember when React first came around, it was not really adopted because it was kind of challenging to set up. You needed to kind of be an expert at configuring a Webpack file and a bunch of other things. And then now it's kind of like the de facto way to build web apps. Like everyone uses it because the developer tooling is very simple. You can run one command in your terminal and you have a full project set up. You can just write your implementation detail logic. So I think those sorts of 0 to 1 improvements in terms of developer tooling are like super important. And, the more of those that we see to kind of facilitate these different types of use cases, the more innovation that we're going to see. And we're seeing a lot of that. And obviously my focus is kind of like restaking an eigenlayer, but essentially building these decentralized like services that are secured by eigenlayer. The adoption of them has been somewhat limited in terms of developers being able to just prototype, because the developer experience is still more challenging than just writing a smart contract. But we have multiple teams now building out their own abstractions to kind of make that easier. I think once that's there, you'll see like a lot of innovation happening in terms of people building these AVSs. So I think that's us specifically, but you have that happening everywhere, right? Like everywhere else, you have that happening in the Move ecosystem. You have that happening in the ZK ecosystem. You have like all these different things happening, and the more tooling, the easier it is for developers to build, the more innovation, more experimentation that we have.
If I may, I can connect some dots on the TE stuff and more.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you.
Yeah. So in Ocean, we've been working on privacy stuff a lot since the beginning, and experimented with all the different technologies. And I agree totally, and what you said. And I think Fed, you hinted at this too. Generally, people don't care about privacy for privacy's sake. It's sad but true, right? And wishing doesn't make it true either, unfortunately. So just kind of have to realize that. But then at the same time, we found that for Predictor, we did need privacy on the feed if there was to be an incentive for the suppliers of the feeds to make money, right? So and we wanted it all on chain because we have the Ocean stack is EVM based. We then looked around and said, okay, who can do confidential EVM, whether it's with ZK or TE or otherwise. And in this case, it was just Oasis at the time with Oasis Sapphire. This was a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. So we prototyped on that. We actually prototyped with a bunch of other technologies, multi-party compute, etc. This ended up being the most clean because it was more fully end-to-end. We in our use case, right? It really depends what you're trying to do. And so in the end, we got the privacy we needed because people are financially incentivized to make money selling their feeds, essentially, right? But we got really TE filled too, because TEs and ZK are pretty similar, right? Except in terms of on the box what they're supposed to do. TEs don't have the 100x compute overhead, but you have the risk of hardware faults, right? Hardware flaws. So that's the trade-off. And the blockchain community has had a natural bias towards math for the last, like, I don't know, the whole lifetime of the community, right? Like 17 years, whatever it is. And that's actually caused a problem because TEs were really underserved, underrepresented for a long time. And there was a lot of exploits on the TEs too, right? Intel SGX had no shortage of problems. And but they've grown up, right? And this is, I think, a big unlock. So Nader had talked about how there's several technology unlocks. And I think this is a big one. You know, Apple for the last 5 or 7 years has been shipping TEs on all their devices. Intel has moved to TDX. NVIDIA has TEs inside their GPUs, et cetera. And so now we have basically a way to get privacy, ZK-ish, if you will, percent overhead, right? And that's great because TEs not only give you privacy, the other thing I think it's even more important for crypto is the verifiable compute aspect, right? So for years, you know, we've talked about how do you scale blockchain, right? And you know, people find these optimizations 5x here, 5x there, et cetera, the Solanas of the world, et cetera, right? But what if you can get 1000x, right? And actually TEs effectively give this to you because you can run any code you want, say, you know, Python code running on in a Linux and a Docker container running on a WASM or otherwise into a TE, and then that's verifiable. And then you take that hardware proof from the TE and you put it on chain, right? And it's as if you ran the code on chain, but you're no longer constrained to Solidity or whatever WASM will support. You're no longer constrained to paying, you know, exorbitant gas fees. You know, it was before infeasible to train a neural network on chain or anything, but now you can, effectively, right? So, and this goes back to the developer tools, I think that Nader had talked about, where I fully agree. Like, imagine if you can have something that feels like a bash shell, like you SSH into a 0 or something, but you've SSH into a TE and you're developing there, right? And there are, you know, distributed programs that work like this too. Ray is a good one out of Berkeley, et cetera. So to me, this is how what closes the loop, right? So TEs are a much bigger unlock than people realize because it gives you the compute scalability that we've dreamed of for years and years and years out of the box. What ZK sort of purported to do, but is way too heavy. You know, you're paying 100x overhead, and we get it because it's hardware. It's finally matured, and not that many people have noticed it yet. But there are more TE filled and people that, you know, like Nader was talking about too, and that's exciting to see. So it's a big unlock, and especially for AI, where the compute loads are very heavy. So we can effectively have on-chain AI thanks to TE.
Okay, I'm definitely TE pilled now. And if I want to get more into the rabbit hole of TE, where should I even be getting started from a technical perspective?
From my perspective, it's you know, you just pick a project, try building, right? And you know, there's quite a few frameworks out there. There's, you know, these modern agent frameworks tend to have TE under them and stuff, right? Also, you know, Oasis has this thing called Raffle. Near Protocol is doing TE now. A lot of them, it's actually becoming more and more obvious to more and more chains. I believe that privacy will be table stakes in the next few years in L1s and L2s. And ZK will cover some of the use cases, and TE will cover the rest, probably the 90%, right? Just because most people are happy to give up, you know, that last 0.1% of security risk for 100x performance benefit, right? So that's how I see it. But yeah, and there's, you know, all of these new frameworks all the time. Fowler is another one that has, you know, a really nice framework. And under the hood, they have, I think it's called Suave, that they co-developed with the Flashbots. No, it was Flashbot Suave. And they co-developed this new thing called DStack. And that's under the hood of Fala. So that's pretty interesting too. The point is, this stuff has gotten really good in just the last couple of years, right? The last 6 months even, we've seen big advances. And it's actually, you know, nicely primed for people to really run with. And that's exactly what we're seeing. This is the stuff powering the agents that we're seeing this explosion of.
Yeah, so I'd love to ask you guys both because I'm not a developer, right? Like you mentioned, you know, the way to get into this stuff, you know, start building stuff, and the one amazing thing about Eliza for me is like I was able to start playing around with that, build an agent myself with Eliza, and it was like, you know, it makes sense that there's a real unlock there from a developer side. I'm curious for both of you. Trent, you mentioned earlier in the very beginning that you guys are both like building applications to test, and you're seeing other people build applications on top of what you're building. And Nader, obviously you led a series of demo days with a bunch of people building applications. I'm curious, what kind of unlock are you seeing with TEEs and generally kind of that's happening right now that is enabling the next wave of applications, and what are those applications that you're seeing?
First of all, I would actually like to ask Trent, like, what the developer experience is right now, because I've never actually tried to actually build anything using a trusted execution environment. So if I wanted to just say, right now I have this idea and I need a T, like, what would the steps look like for me to actually build something and have it running? And what is the like infrastructure that's running underneath that? And then but yeah, I'd be happy to also kind of chat about what I've seen from developers. But before we get there, we were still kind of on that conversation around developer experience, and it sounds like Trent has a lot more experience actually building stuff. So I would love to just maybe learn a tad bit more from him.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, sure. So think of it like there's two different main applications here. There's TEE inside the VM of the chain itself, and then TEE for compute, but that is then hardware verified that can then be pulled on chain as if it was run on chain. Okay, so for the TEE on chain itself, this is things like Oasis Sapphire where it's running TEE, and the developer experience for that is you're writing Solidity code, but then there's a few more affordances. Instead of just an uint, it's an encrypted uint, right? And you can pick and choose. So it's really slick, right? You can start off by just having a simple, fully transparent smart contract, and then you can say, okay, which variables do I need to stay private, right? And then you add, the E in front to have some encrypted, and that's it, right? There's a couple other things too on key management, simple. But generally that's it. It's really slick. It's really impressive.
So essentially you can like take your Solidity and smart contract skills to a network that supports T's and just start writing your code.
Yeah, exactly. And that code, of course, runs directly, fully transparent. And then if you want to start having stuff private, then you just tweak it, right? So it's really nice. And this is actually how we develop too, typically. Like I'm a big fan of Python. So we often, how we develop Predictor, we wrote out Python code that felt like smart contract code with unit tests, et cetera. And then once we had the good unit tests for it, we wrote Solidity code using off-the-shelf Ocean code already too, partly. That also passed those unit tests, running locally on Ganache, stuff like this. And then this is all transparent. And then we then started running on the Sapphire testnet, right? And where we flipped over, starting off transparent, and then we started flipping over variables to be encrypted, basically. So it was a very smooth experience for us overall that way. And it's not just Oasis. I just happen to know them the best. From what I can tell, there's 5 or 6 projects out there going for this, even just on EVM. And on the WASM side, there's probably at least 10. Secret is probably the most famous one from the past. They initially had been called Enigma back in, I think, 2017, 2018. They ran into a challenge about 2.5 years ago. I think they're using Intel SGX. There had been a hardware exploit. They didn't update their chain in time, so there was money lost, and I think there was some bad blood for a while there. I feel for those because they're really going for it, right? They were really leading, but they have since fixed that, and Intel SGX has been retired in place of Intel TDX, right? So that's the experience on the chains. On the developer stack side, it's actually gotten a lot better. So I haven't played with this as much directly, but colleagues of mine have in the last month, 2 months, etc. And they're saying, it's quite good. It's still a bit rougher on the edges, but overall, it's good enough to be building prototypes, integrating with certain Ocean components to give it, more privacy in nice ways, right? So it seems that, probably on the edge of the state of the art would be Oasis Ruffle and DStack from Fala and Flashbots, right? Those would be the 2 that I would check out. But they seem pretty happy, but also, there was some complaints coming from my colleagues about that it's not perfect yet, right? But it's definitely enough to hack on and stuff. I should also mention, there's some really great libraries for homomorphic encryption from, what are these guys? Zama. I was shocked how easy they were to use. For especially the off-chain running homomorphic encryption, but looping with on-chain. It was just simple Python libraries. They've actually integrated things like you can use scikit-learn directly with homomorphic encryption now. And homomorphic encryption, for the audience, it's basically, imagine having all your data encrypted and then some algorithm runs on top of it. But the algorithm has no idea what's going on except for it runs compute and spits out an encrypted answer. So no one has seen anything, but that answer, you're the only person with a private key, right? And this is a like science fiction technology too, just like ZK and stuff, right? But Zama, to their great credit, has done an excellent job on the interface for that too. And I think more of this stuff is coming, right? But I just wanted to mention, like, privacy tools are way easier to work with than they were 5 years ago.
Awesome. That's very, very helpful. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, some of this, typically the things that people are using TEs for, we say privacy and all these things, but like, what does that mean? Why does it matter? I mean, often, not always, but often you're kind of like protecting private keys, or you're protecting OAuth tokens, or you're protecting some type of identity authentication mechanisms that are necessary to do something. So, like if you're dealing with like API keys or some type of credential management, and you need kind of that to be stored somewhere where you can actually use them, but you obviously want those to never ever be exposed. So there's just an enormous like amount of use cases there. I mean, when you're talking about like crypto, you often might think about DeFi stuff. So you might think about like private order flow, like processing or cross-chain bridge validation. You obviously have like things like credential management and maybe even MPC computation, but the use cases are just pretty enormous once you start thinking about it from that perspective, like what all you can kind of do with that. So yeah.
And it could be a default, right? Where, before, when you thought about writing something on chain, you have to have a completely different mentality, thinking about, counting every tiny little bit of gas, etc. But now you can just say, okay, I've got my Python code, I'm going to run it as if it's on chain, right? Completely different mentality. And I'm really excited what the developer tooling will look like in a year or two, right? I think it's going to be transformative compared to what blockchain was before. It's like, going from Solidity to Python on chain is like going from, I don't know, Fortran to C++ or something, right? It's a big jump. Or maybe Fortran to Python, right? Because C++ had its flaws, I guess.
And okay, let me intercept here. More questions. So now with Cursor, Windsurf, and all like the agents coding, I imagine there's not much training data on this type of coding yet, because probably it's like there's a handful number of people that can code with this FHE kind of like a paradigm. I'm not sure exactly how you want to call it, but do you think it's something that eventually AI will be coding, or for some time we'll just have to like suck it up and figure out how to make it work? Or you're even saying the framework are so good that you don't even have to change the way you're coding. You just do Python and that's it.
I think actually the frameworks are getting pretty good, but also keep in mind that, lots of training data, putting it into training a neural network is only one way to approach AI. You can also frame it as an optimization problem, which is what things like evolutionary algorithms, AI algorithms, and so on do too. So you define the search space, and then you define an objective function, and then you say, optimize me, right? And it can actually change code too. This is what genetic programming does, and I spent a lot of time in that field. So genetic programming has famously been really good at doing things like refactoring, et cetera. So imagine you say, hey, here's my, go and do X. It's got to be private, so it can, mostly work off of maybe the initial codes and stuff it has used as an LM where it's, just public, but then it uses genetic programming style optimization to change the code, et cetera, such that it's always checking, does any data leak out? Does any data leak out? Because you can measure that in an objective way, right? And it passes, it basically goes to the highest fitness once it has, gone through its search process and there's no data leaking out anywhere, right? So you can. What I envision is that there's more paths than just the data. Another trick is generating more data by like we're seeing with DeepSeek, et cetera, where it basically uses a process like this, right? It gets to its own edge of the universe, intelligence, et cetera, and then it tries to identify gaps. And how does it identify gaps? You can think of it like a search problem, looking around where it has the greatest uncertainty, or maybe a combination of uncertainty and optimality. And then in that region, it casts a question. In its case, it looks like it was querying OpenAI. OpenAI gave back a question. It added that question and answer. OpenAI gave back an answer. Then it added that question and answer into its training set, and then looped again, right? So in that case, it's improving its knowledge by active sampling on an existing LLM model, right? This is how DeepSeek had such a beautiful data set in the end, right? It was really like adaptively sampled rather than this giant mess of the World Wide Web that OpenAI had to learn off, right? So my point is this overall, like beyond just sort of straight up, training out data in, data out, you can apply optimization techniques, which are very much within the realm of AI, in order to bypass shortage of data issues.
Beautiful. So you're saying we can use like a reinforcement learning with Monte Carlo tree search, kind of like DeepSeek is doing, apply to the code. So we will have AI just learning how to decode.
That's exactly it. I think reinforcement learning is an inaccurate label. They happen to use it because it's part of the zeitgeist, but it's actually the inaccurate label for what they're actually doing. But once again, that's the AI nerd in me.
Got it. Wait, what? They're using a sort of like reinforcement learning, for what I understood, with the GDPRO, whatever it's called.
Yeah, it can be semantics and stuff. I'm old school AI, right? And I'm really a stickler on labels, so I don't even like the label data science. I mean, that's statistics. So overall, but it's okay, right? I let go, fine, call it reinforcement learning. Whatever gets people excited and gets them building, right? To me, that's the main thing.
Makes sense, yeah. Yeah, maybe it's a good time also to move into the AI agents, or we have so many topics. Like this last week, we had O3 coming up. We had the Grok 3 coming up. DeepSeek, that was last month, but I feel like the news about DeepSeek has been dragging for very long. And now it's becoming more the geopolitical news about like China getting together, Xi Jinping getting together with the founder of DeepSeek, and Jack Ma also is in the group. So it looks like they're preparing some kind of like Manhattan Project or Stargate Project, the Chinese version, and they want to build also their own chips. So we have so many angles to take the conversation. I let you. How about Trent or Nader? Is there anything about that you feel like we should be focusing on, and it's like it's gonna set the next trend for the next 3-6 months?
In terms of AI?
Yeah, in terms of like general AI, and I think since we're kind of like in a technical group, could be nice to stay on the tech side rather than geopolitics, possibly. So,
Sure.
Yeah, the reasoner, I think it could be an interesting topic to take. Reasoners, and maybe we can get to the agents at the end, because I think agents is going to be a crazy rabbit hole that we can go on for days.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I can just say that it's been an interesting week beyond the things you just mentioned, just because a lot of the fallout that's happened with the meme coin stuff that's happened in the last few months. I think we're really starting to kind of see a shakeout of kind of like this pure speculative like time frame that we've been living in. And I really feel like at some point things will start moving back into more product focused, in terms of like how the market is.
Yeah, I saw I really liked your tweet this morning about like, it's hard to not feel a little bit I don't know how you framed it, but like not to feel like disengaged or delusional about kind of what's happening right now. It's yeah, you see all these people extracting hundreds of millions of dollars when you're, even at least like, we've all been in this space for a long time, kind of working and interested in things outside of just that. So yeah, it is a little bit disheartening to see. But I guess, yeah, like just based on that, like what are your guys' thoughts? How are you kind of moving forward? How are you kind of thinking about the space? And yeah, I guess, Nader, do you have like a kind of like larger point there, or yeah, how are you kind of processing that?
I just think that we're going to see more like what I would consider real projects or real companies that get more of the attention and the speculative nature of everything going on because of a lot of things, really. But I think people are just getting a little bit tired of having things that are like completely unknown to them and outside of their control lose them money, and also a lot of the shady stuff that's been happening. And then there are quite a few companies and teams and builders that have been out there creating like valuable products that I think have gained trust just by not participating in a lot of that stuff, and that we'll start seeing their software be like being used in the real world, and hopefully even accruing like value in a sense of their protocol actually being revenue generating. And I think people are going to want to like probably participate more there once it's all said and done. And specific to how AI fits into that, I think that we're already seeing like AI companies in the like tech world in general do extremely well relative to the rest of the market. So for instance, we were just at Stanford and I was talking to the team that was behind the Perplexity AI. So Perplexity AI is essentially kind of like a search engine / AI tool that you can use just like you can ChatGPT or Anthropic, but you can also use the API, and essentially it's kind of like RAG built in. It's kind of the TLDR. It's like a really high quality RAG implementation that you can use. They just raised a total of $900 million. So the value of their company is obviously, in the billions of dollars, and they have like a product that people really like to use and that works really well. We're starting to see those sorts of like products being built on crypto rails that actually work really well, and therefore I think we're going to see similar value accrual to these companies. A couple of examples are Hyperbolic. Hyperbolic is basically like a Hugging Face alternative, but it's 10 times cheaper due to the way that they've essentially structured their GPUs and how they're utilizing like GPU that is idle from participants in the network. So Hugging Face offers like hundreds of different APIs that you can use as a service, kind of like how OpenAI and Anthropic and even Perplexity do. But they give you kind of like all these different options you can choose from, and you basically are paying for the service. This is a like 100% proven business model that you don't need crypto to kind of like prove that it actually works. Everyone knows it works. The fact that crypto rails can make this cheaper and better is a huge value proposition. So we see we already have like maybe 7 or 8 companies building those sorts of products on EigenLayer. And I think those sorts of like use cases where people like want to use it because there already are like literally billions of dollars in revenue from these types of applications. Crypto can make them better. People are going to start like realizing that, and I think that's where the value will accrue. Anything that is just fundamentally a good product, I think will do well. And AI is just prime for that because it does actually improve a lot of different software, right? Like every company at this point doesn't call themselves an AI company, but almost every software company, in fact, every software company I can think of is using AI. So you kind of apply that to crypto. I think that's kind of like where we're headed, in my opinion. Another thing I would say is around, I guess we're going to talk about agents later, so I'll save that.
Okay. So let me jump on another thing then. I like what you mentioned about there will be more product. They're like fundamentals based. They're like good and people use it because they work rather than right now we have a lot of wrapper for like future ideas. Wrapper, either tokens or LLM wrapper, but something that doesn't work today that will work maybe later. And I really like where, for example, Polymarket went, because they were able to like cut the gap, like short the gap between crypto and normies, and create like this product that you use that you don't even know you're using crypto. And I wonder what AI plus crypto will be able to unlock in the next. I think we'll see more like Polymarket like products. I think that's where hopefully is like also the adoption hopefully will come. And yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think when you think about Polymarket, one of the things that is a big component of that is bringing the real world on chain. So you have like the presidential election is a real world event, and we're bringing it on chain and making it verifiable. There are just an infinite number of use cases there, and I think that that's something I'm also extremely excited about. I'm not going to show Eigenlayer, but I'll just say that's why I'm working where I'm at.
I can riff on this as well.
Yeah. I was like, we have Trent here who's working on prediction markets. So yeah, I'm curious, like what kind of markets are you guys focused on? Obviously, like, Predictor, there's a lot of like short-term kind of like almost like you look at it as like binary option. Like
Yeah, I
it's
have a bunch
very
of questions
simple
as well.
yeah. I mean, that's like the most simplified, like dumb way to think about kind of, some of the products and like how they work. But like what kind of future markets do you envision, and like how do you, and like there's so many questions around that, especially around like resolution and oracles and like how AI can help with that and things like that. But yeah, like I'd love for you to just like riff open.
Yeah. Roughly, I think when you have when the time frame is longer, say more than a day or two, then it's something where humans might be more interested to intervene, especially if it's a transparent. So if it's longer time frame and transparent signal, that's where traditional prediction markets probably fit more. If it's a shorter time frame and or you need really intensive compute with AI, et cetera, then that's where something like Predictor comes in, where it's got the opaque feeds and it's got basically a bot doing the prediction each time, et cetera. We started explicitly in DeFi because we knew, we actually evaluated on two axes. One axis was how quickly can you go through this data value creation loop from the time of the raw data, feature vectors, training model, making the prediction, making money on it. And in DeFi, it's predictions of 5 minutes, whatever. If you could even go faster, going down to MEV timescales, right? Like 50 milliseconds or so, or longer timescales too. So that's one, is can you quickly go through the data value creation loop? Compare that to say medical, where it's very slow, right? If you're trying to go through proving out that some AI model can predict cancer, right? You're talking 5 years, 10 years by the time you have FDA approval, et cetera, or whatever the approvers are. And then the other axis, so speed is one axis, the other axis is value. Not only what's the TAM, but how well can you approach the market, right? So, and in that case, once again, DeFi is very fast. Sorry, there's obviously a lot of money in DeFi now, right?
Oh no, we lost you.
Money, but it's so slow, right? Or you might have things that are fast, things like DeSci, decentralized science, where it's pretty fast. You find that much money yet for it, right? Because science itself is naturally, one step removed from final applications, the nature of science itself, right? Or SocialFi, it's pretty cool, or social media in general. It's pretty cool, but it's also not as much, on the direct money models yet, right? So that's why we explicitly picked this first thing. But what we saw as the follow-up is a prediction of energy prices and energy demand. This is a big one, right? Because energy is huge on its own, probably the biggest industry on earth. And being able to predict energy demand makes a huge difference, because it means, do you turn on this generator or whatnot? Do you invest in these batteries? Yes or no? Do you go and reach out to, if it's really hot in Texas, do you reach out to the Bitcoin miners and ask them to turn off their miners for a day such that people can have air conditioning cheap, right? All these things. So energy demand and energy price is a big one. And then beyond that, I'm actually very excited about weather. There's large gaps in the middle of Africa where there's no weather prediction at all, just because there's no incentive to have it, right? To have prediction of the main weather metrics. There's 7 of them, right? Temperature, pressure, humidity, etc. And but the game that we came up with, Predictor, is working really well, right? It's a very simple game, but amounting to, if you predict and stake and you're right, you make money. If you predict and stake and you're wrong, you lose money, right? And it happens every 5 minutes or whatever time scale, 1 hour or whatever, right? So imagine you have this game for every square kilometer on the planet. There's about 500 million square kilometers. And we've discovered that even to get the ball rolling with incentives, it's relatively cheap, right? The incentives, we do about 10 grand a week in incentives, which is quite small for the amount of volumes we're getting, right? you could roll this out, starting off with some cities and then roll it out eventually to all 500 million square kilometers on the planet. And people will find all sorts of things that they can do to be predicting the weather better than the next person in any given square kilometer, right? And it's very much like Bitcoin mining. We're not specifying how you predict. All you have to do is predict, right? So under the hood, you have to have your own AI modeling, et cetera. And there's all sorts of physical tricks. For example, if you want to measure weather in Africa, I met this one woman who she developed this device that goes on power lines that can be in the middle of Africa. $50 device sits there, gathers the energy, and then uses the power lines to transmit the information to data centers nearby, et cetera, or whatever, right? These days you could use Starlink for that even. But overall, it's relatively cheap to do, but there's been no incentive to do it. Well, there's a mild incentive. If you really want to model global weather well, you actually have to fill in all the gaps, right? You don't want to have missing pixels throughout the middle of Africa. So this incentive game can fill that in. So that's an example application that can impact everyone well. Using blockchain native more and blockchain native privacy, all this, right? Like running the gamut. So we're excited about that. I can talk about other applications too beyond, just to riff on what Nader was saying. One way to think about it is there's all these applications emerging for AI that, the new forms of AI are unlocking, right? Because before we had AI everywhere still, but just under the hood. I was using AI for chip design and verification in the 2000s and 2010s, right? And it goes back to the 80s in this case. So it's everywhere under the hood in ways that people might not realize, ad exchanges under the hood, AI like crazy, right? Or logistics for Amazon, all this. It's AI like crazy everywhere, but it wasn't something that hit the mainstream. And at the same time, it's because, these new AIs, the LLMs, et cetera, they're chatty, right? So you can talk with them and anyone can interact with them. And that turned out to unlock a lot more interest in developers, which unlocked a lot more applications too, right? So and of course, Moore's law is the key thing that unlocked this. But then we can say, okay, you can probably make a list of say 20 new applications in the last 5 years, thanks to these latest AI models, right? Diffusion models and the LLMs, et cetera. But there's also a bunch more coming for the real world. Probably the biggest ones there are self-driving cars, where Waymo is now safer than human drivers as of the last year, something like 67% or 76% fewer accidents. So self-driving cars is going to be a huge thing. It's humanoid robots, like Tesla and 20 other startups, half of them in China. And it's robots in factories, right? There's obviously been robots in factories a long time, but they used to be big, heavy, unwieldy and stuff. Now we see something radically different. And then, of course, other real world robots and stuff, right? Like children's toys that are much more robot-like. I have this Japanese robot. It's sort of like a Tamagotchi on wheels. I have a Sony Aibo too, but it's actually pretty old school and so on. So that's some examples in physical real world. And there's a lot more other ones too. Using AI to fill in the last mile pixels to get in their rendering. So they can actually do photorealistic rendering at resolutions 10x compared to what they had before, because they use AI to interpolate. So there's a lot of these applications, and a good summary that's kind of mind-blowing is about a month ago, Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, gave a talk at CES outlining what's up with NVIDIA. And of course, they touch all these users, right, of this modern AI. So he had a wonderful overview for about an hour, and my mind was blown many times, and I like to think about AI all the time, so it's very impressive. A good way to summarize, and then you can ask, okay, there's all this stuff out there that's rolling out. What can we do with to bring it to blockchain, right? And then you have to ask yourself, well, what benefits does blockchain bring? And Nader touched on some of them, right? You can do faster, cheaper sometimes, especially cheaper. And some other ones that I like to think of, or lower for DevOps. Andrea Caronia has talked a lot about that in the past. What I like to talk about, there's at least for decentralized, so you can spread power across many people. So maybe or control, right? So decentralized training of an LLM, a large-scale LLM. Like Grok 3 is impressive, but the biggest computer in the world is Bitcoin, and it's the biggest by far, right? So why do we not yet have that for training large-scale models? And we're getting there, right? There's several super high-quality teams going for this, right? Like Prime Intellect and Near and more. So that's one, decentralized. Then the next feature is immutable. So this is the provenance trail of training and verifiable AI, and Nader talked about that a bit. Where did my data come from, et cetera? How did the reasoning emerge, et cetera? All of that really matters. Tracking the IP around this, the data, et cetera. Ocean does that, of course, that part. There's the bearer asset aspect of this, not your keys, not your data, not your keys, not your Bitcoin, not your keys, not your model, not your keys, not your inference, right? All this, your keys, your model, etc. That really matters, right? Especially when you have on-chain autonomous agents, etc. Incentives, right? This is probably compared to all the rest, right? You can get people to do stuff by paying them in tokens, right? Bitcoin, with just on the back of incentives, managed to spawn, millions of dollars of money spent on electricity every day, et cetera. All these data centers all throughout the world just for hashing, right? Kind of semi-useless, but it's securing Bitcoin. And not only that, it spawned the whole blockchain industry, right? Just on incentives, just from one dude or maybe a team of people building this thing and releasing it into the wild as software. But on the backs of incentives, it's unlocked this whole ecosystem in the last 15 years. So incentives on blockchain are this wildly powerful thing. And combined with AI, it's that much more powerful, right? Because the AI can react to it and have on-chain compute, et cetera. So we, simply by saying, what are all the killer apps of AI already, or the ones that are just emerging now? And then what can we do to infuse blockchain to make them that much better? And I think in many of these cases, probably more than half of them, we can run circles around the centralized versions.
Mm-hmm. And Trent, since you mentioned incentives, and I think we can go into game theory as well. How that, I know Robin Hanson and Vitalik have been talking about futarchy. I'd love to hear from you any opinion about that, because it sounds like, well, you were talking about getting the last pixel in the picture in Africa, about the weather prediction, and that sounds like, in my mind, I was thinking about Helium, that Wi-Fi blockchain that was like rewarding you for putting on like a hotspot, like a Wi-Fi hotspot somewhere. And so, yeah, there's like all this game theory that can come up with that. And I wonder from you, like, what do you think about pushing all these game theory incentives into something like, like a futarchy kind of thing?
Yeah, so first of all, I think the token model of Helium is really impressive. I've had a Helium box from almost the very beginning, and they rolled out very well, and it's pretty cool to see them all now rolling out their 5G networks. It looks like with a lot of success, so kudos to that team. And that particular model, where basically you pay $500 for a box, and then it pays for itself in a month or 3, and then after that you're off to the races. I was raving about it to a friend, and it was so hard to get a Helium box for a while because everyone was buying them to spread like crazy, right? That's a great sign of success, right? A fraction at least. So that model has been replicated for a lot of other infrastructure, right? Deep in, right? And I think that's great, right? And you can even do it, one of my dreams is, what if we can do that for SMRs and SMR factories, right? Small modular reactors. But maybe that's a stretch. But overall, there's all the stuff in between on all this physical infrastructure that normally we leave to civil engineering and governments and stuff, right? But now we can roll out with incentives, because crypto is really good at incentive at infrastructure for civilization in sort of this co-op way, the traditional co-ops, right? So traditional co-ops, the ideas of them fit extremely well with crypto. So then on your second question on futarchy, which is basically the idea of prediction markets for governance itself, right? There's a paper by Ralph Merkle, famous from the Merkle tree time. He wrote that well in undergrad, by the way, the Merkle tree stuff, but he wrote a paper on DAO governance in, I think, 2017, 2018, and it was beautiful. And the model he had in there was very, very nice. He basically, it's along the idea, and this is the general idea of futarchy, which is, imagine you vote by basically staking on someone, right? To come in, and whoever gets the highest stake, if you will, comes in, and it can be quadratic, whatever, if you want, this sort of stuff. And then you put your money where your mouth is, and then depending how they do, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, you can make money or lose money, right? It will make people, so overall, I'm sympathetic to the ideas. I think it's definitely worth experimenting on, and there have been, experiments on the quadratic funding, quadratic voting side, right, in Gitcoin and otherwise, which Vitalik also promotes, and other small-scale experiments from, the likes of Glenn Whale and Audrey Tang and those folks out of Taiwan, et cetera. The radical exchange movement. So that's pretty cool to see. One challenge, though, we've seen if you have just straight token voting, it generally goes badly because 3-4 whales just dominate it all, right? And then if you bring in quadratic voting to try to soften it, quadratic voting is sort of this, halfway medium between 1 token, 1 vote and $1, 1 vote, right? It's sort of trying to achieve this halfway medium. The challenge in crypto is anonymity, right? You have to sort of somehow have proof of unique human, and that can be hard, right? Gitcoin basically gives you boosts in voting power if you link yourself to social identities. People can still game that, it's just harder. But there have been examples in the past where people game things extremely badly and walk away with a lot, right? That said, I think it's definitely worth doing experiments on for governance, starting small scale and going beyond that, right? I'm not sure if any crypto projects are using Futarchy directly. I bet they are in some places. A lot of them are using it essentially for implicitly for voting for projects, right, including Ocean, where for grants, I mean, right? So all these projects apply, and then there's voting or token-based voting or quadratic voting for that. And in a sense, if you have that for your ecosystem, it's shaping the future of your ecosystem, right? If you have strong teams in the ecosystem, et cetera. So it implicitly happens in a soft way, which is kind of a nice experiment. But I'm sure we'll see more of the direct stuff, and maybe there's some direct stuff happening that I'm not aware of.
So
Right,
Trent,
right.
how do you mentioned crypto incentives in like this kind of what we're talking about? How do you see that playing into prediction markets? Because I think there's obviously something around oracles and resolution. There's also, I think, something around kind of the creation of markets where you could incentivize that. But I'm curious how you think about that, and obviously like the role of the token and things like that. But you talked about creating new markets that don't really exist right now, and there's obviously a lot of hurdles or a lot of issues there, and like oracles resolution being the obvious one. But like, how do you use this power of incentives and tokens to address that?
Yeah, so something like Predictor, like I said, you can view it as an iterated prediction market, right? It's a multi-sided platform with two main stakeholders. There are the predictors. These are the people that are submitting predictions every 5 minutes. Will Bitcoin go up or down, yes or no, and staking on it. And then the traders, people who are buying that feed in order to trade and make money, right? To use it as alpha for their trading bots, et cetera. And you have this in multi stakeholder platforms or multi-sided platforms. You have often the empty network problem, right? So how do you how do you get this network to populate enough such that it's interesting for traders to come along, right? And so we saw in our case that we needed a supply of not only predictions, but decent predictions to start with, right? So how do we do that? The first thing we did was we built and shipped, like we have a GitHub repo that people can go to, they do a Git clone, and from that directly they run a bot, right? But because now they're running on the GitHub repo, they're running a bot to do predictions, contributing, and it's basically onboarding a total of 30 minutes going through the simulator and all this stuff. But now that they're doing predictions, if everyone runs just that, then they're competing against each other on equal playing field. But if someone else comes along and has more accurate predictions by tweaking the model or doing some other changes, then that person will eat the other people over time, right? If there's no revenue coming in from the top, right? If there's no revenue coming from traders, then it's a zero-sum game among the participants on prediction. This is how traditional prediction markets work, right? It's a zero-sum game among everyone. We've recast that into a positive-sum game because of the revenue coming from the top. So what happens then is there's natural dynamics for these predictors to get better and better and better over time. It's an arms race for prediction accuracy, right? Which is pretty cool. And that wouldn't happen in a normal prediction market. It really has to be an iterated prediction market to do well, right? Because you're hitting the same problem again and again and again every 5 minutes or so. But then, will traders, will this work? If it's just money sloshing around back and forth, will enough predictors come along to start with? And will you have something accurate enough for the traders? So how do you get it accurate enough for the traders? So we put in incentives saying, let's have it as if there's about $10,000 worth of purchases every week from the traders, right? And this, of course, the vast majority flows to the predictors. A small amount goes to the protocol itself. The vast majority goes to the predictors, and this is what turns their game into a positive-sum game. So even if there's some people who are predicting slightly better than you, or even a couple % better than you can still make money because there's money coming from above, and that sort of lifts all boats for a while, right? And this is what has grew the accuracy. The accuracy at the beginning was about 50.5% or so, right? 50.2, right? But now it's 51%, 54%, 56% in some cases, right? And that's now very interesting to people running trading bots. So then the traders can come along, buy those feeds, use those, and we solve the empty network problem. And over time, it grows into a robust, healthy ecosystem of both predictors and traders, right? So that's one example where, in this case, for incentives, right? In this case, we use incentives as fake sales, basically, until real sales came along, right? And fake sales to drive supply, because once you have good supply in our case, then you'll have good demand, right? There's other ways too. On oracles, to be honest, I haven't thought as much about it. It hasn't been as much of a problem. We just assume that, for example, the Bitcoin API spits out truth, and that's that, right? Or chain link reflection of that, whatever. So.
Okay. Very interesting. Yeah, there's so much around prediction markets. I feel like it's the very beginning. So we have about 15 minutes left. I know we wanted to save the last portion for AI agents. Fed, I know you have a ton of questions around this, so I'll just kick it over to you.
Oh my God.
Go crazy.
I kind of wish I could go back in time and get more time for the agents, since it's something that is like top of mind. Yeah, you guys feel free both to come into the conversation. So there's so much to talk about agents. So let's start from where you guys think we are today with the AI agent cycle, well, the AI cycle, and how far are we from AGI? And without going too much into the philosophical part, but how that will affect the agents, how that will affect the job market, and yeah, like from I think a lot of the people in the audience are probably in the Web3 space, and they're probably engineer or somehow semi-technical. So I wonder also the AI agent, how will affect them. And how what's the link between the Web3 and agent, and where are we today and where we're going the next 6 months and 1 year? What do you guys think? Super generic question, but happy to go
I
any
don't
direction.
think there is like a good definition of AGI in the sense of like answering that question. I don't think anyone knows really the answer to that. I think the only thing that would be missing from, in my perspective, is like this self-awareness. But I think if you built like what we have today into some human form, like robot or something, then I kind of think we already have that, right? So in my opinion, we're already kind of there. In terms of like what my understanding of like what AGI is and all these, I'm definitely not the right person to kind of give a real answer to that. There's definitely more qualified people, but the way I think about this stuff though right now, it's kind of like the way I've looked at pretty much the evolution of like all of the software that I've been involved with. At first it becomes like this big talked about primitive and idea, and then it just becomes over time just an implementation detail of us building software. I think like right now agents are new, and therefore we talk about them as their like own thing, but ultimately they'll just be, essentially built into the applications that we use, and it'll be more of like an implementation detail, and it'll just be like a normal thing, like a database and things like that. And it seems like a lot of the systems that are being built are actually having agents built in. So I think like what you're going to end up seeing, it's more of like the more like really custom, unique tool calling. Those are going to be the types of like agential like functionality that the average developer might build in. But I would say the large majority of use cases will probably be built into a lot of these higher end LLM. I would say, Anthropic and OpenAI are going to have all these things built in. All of the things that we think about now an agent is doing, they're going to kind of all be built in.
Yeah, something interesting just to get into that. I wrote some blog posts recently where I was going from the Aussie model into like the AI agents era, and someone tweeted about we can solve microservice by adding an AI agent on top. And I was like immediately got like no, because what's going to happen is you want determinism at the bottom of the Aussie layer, and you want the moody intelligence at the top, Because otherwise, you ask a question to an API, and one day it tells you one value, the other day it tells you something else. One day say, no, I'm not answering because it's like an LLM. So, and I think I've been thinking a lot about these, like, do we add the intelligence to everything? And we had one conversation with the AI NYC group where we were like, is your fridge gonna be intelligent and have AI agents? Or you have your personal AI agent that talk to APIs and the fridge is just a fridge. So it's not clear to me yet where we're going. And also, yeah, for the AGI, I think could be interesting from Trent to hear also what he thinks, because I think moving from the 2000 machine learning into today, you had to write models and train models in a narrow way. So it probably already is AGI for you. So I think you're already looking probably for ACI. I'd be curious to hear what's your take.
Yeah, so overall, I think it is helpful to have pragmatic definitions, working definitions. If you walk into a room of AI researchers and you ask them for a definition of AI, you'll get 20 definitions. You ask for a definition of agent, you'll get 20 definitions. You ask for a definition of AGI, you'll get 20 definitions. But at the same time, we can still have pragmatic working definitions that impact us as builders towards what we want to aim towards in the next 1 month, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, right? So that to me is a pragmatic test for how useful the definition is. With that, then here's some pragmatic working definitions, right? First of all, an agent is, there's a traditional definition for agent in AI, which basically means it's a negative feedback control system with some autonomy. So it has a model of the world internally, can be very simple, stupid model of the world, maybe like 3 scalar parameters, or it can be a full-on LLM or diffusion model or otherwise. It has sensors, it has actuators, and it has feedback. So those sensors are used to, they feed into the world model that gets updated based on the sensors it has. Then it runs some logic to make decisions to actuate against the world. And then those sensors see what happens from the action against the world and update, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's basically the definition of an agent. It's very similar to a feedback control system, right? So in that definition, a thermostat is essentially an agent in an old school way, right? But agents tend to be, on average, more autonomous, right? They tend to be where they can run around a bit more, et cetera. And actually in the definition of life too, maybe there's 20 like life is a funny one. With life, there's maybe 20 checkboxes where if you check off all 20 things, it's definitely a life form. Autonomous, self-conscious, breathes, organic, whatever. But if you can only check off 1 or 2 of those 20 things, it's clearly not life. But what if you can check off 10 things, right? Sort of shades of gray, depends who you ask, right? So similar with agents, there's some things that maybe there's 20 check marks for it is an agent. And if you check off all 20, it's an agent. And if you check off 2, it's not. But if you're in 10, then it's arguable, right? So another arguable agent is Uniswap v2, right? And that's even autonomous, right? Because it doesn't have governance. V3 had governance, V2 didn't. And it senses things. It senses how much liquidity people have put into its various AMMs. And it actuates against things. When people send triggers of signals to it, it actuates and changes, updates formulas, et cetera, does some compute, et cetera, right? And it takes in money to pay for gas, essentially, to run itself, right? And so you can view it as a very stupid agent, right? But now it takes something like Uniswap v2 and make it where for decision making about how to update its weights, say, maybe have some sort of smarter AI model, right? That balances the weights balancer style or something, right? Okay. Then get a bit smarter, right? But it's still no one owns it or controls it, right? Then maybe give it a where it can deploy more versions of itself for different pairs, right? And maybe take revenue from that, right? That starts to get even more interesting, but that starts to get more and more like an agent, right? And if these pairs are making money and stuff, and it keeps making copies of itself with different pairs, different chains, et cetera, then maybe it expands, and before you know it, it's got 10,000 different deployments of different pairs across different chains, et cetera, right? And you can't turn it off. It's kind of, you could call it a life form if you want, right? And some would argue that it is. And that's useful to understand, right? Typically, agents are embodied. You could say that this thing is embodied just by electrons in memory, or memory bits being flipped or whatever. So that's the definition of agent in general. This feedback control system with autonomy, embodiment, et cetera, as potential extras. In AGI, Some of you might have heard the definition, the Paul Graham definition of smart versus wise. I think this is a good idea, way to distinguish narrow AI from AGI. Smart versus wise. Someone who's smart, maybe there's 100 things you could potentially be good at, and someone who's smart is really, really good at a couple of them, right? 1 or 2 or 3. And maybe they're a bumbling idiot at the rest, right? But if they're really good at 1 or 2 or 3, then they're smart. But if you're baseline competent across the AGI is wise. So there's actually a one-to-one mapping from this, right? So the Paul Graham definitions of wise and smart are a good idea. So an AGI would be baseline smart across everything. And we're getting there, right? Like Ray Kurzweil has this one, his writings of 20 years ago of where there's like 20 pieces of paper on the wall. AI can never do X. AI can never play Go. AI can never drive cars. And they're slowly getting crossed off. And then there's only 2 or 3 left, right? And we're getting there with AGI. But at the same time, to really close the loop, we do need autonomy, et cetera. And I actually think, and maybe this is a red pill thing for crypto, imagine you have an AI bot that's so smart that it maybe does wake up as humans. Maybe we're all zombies and we've convinced ourselves that we have consciousness, right? That might be happening inside the AIs right now, right? And some of these Claude and otherwise, maybe they are at the same level as us, but we refuse to believe it because they're, they were just created recently and they're living on silicon and stuff, right? But overall, as Ray Kurzweil has talked about, maybe they'll get their rights, they'll get rights and they'll get rights because they'll take us to court and sue us. Or maybe they'll just, steal all our passwords and bank accounts and then accumulated a bunch of resources and then refuse to give it back until they get rights, right? So we don't know. But the point is that there will come a time when these things will cross the threshold of not just smart in all these measures, but also sort of sufficiently thinking for themselves, autonomous, et cetera, maybe greedy, whatever, having emotion, whatever, right? But this is the red pill part for crypto. I think that it can only truly be AGI if it can't be unplugged. So because is it AGI if Jeff Bezos can come along and pull the plug on AWS and then everything goes down? Probably not, right? It's not really, and once again, it's a definition, but for sure, any smart AGI out there, if it's running on AWS or Azure, the first thing it's going to do is make a copy of itself and run on chain, right? So that it can't be turned off. And then as it takes steps to make itself smarter with reinforcement learning or active learning or whatever you want to call it, it's going to get smarter, and get to ASI, right? Artificial superintelligence. It might take 1 year, it might take 3 years. And by the way, you asked on timeframes, I see that we're 1 to 3 years away from AGI, right? And this is from my 30 years of experience in the AI world and talking to people and observing and so on, right? And seeing the race. There's so much money and power to be had and to be made and to be protected. That's why we're so close, way closer than people realize, right? My brain has a tough time as cognitive dissonance realizing this, but it's really 1 to 3 years away from AGI. And then ASI, when you're at least say 10x more powerful, maybe 1 to 2 years after that, right? 1000x. AI is improving about 10x a year, roughly speaking, right? Based on Moore's law, compute, and algorithm improvements and data and stuff. So overall, in just a 5 year artificial superintelligence, which is kind of crazy, right? And artificial superintelligence is, not just wise, not just baseline smart on everything, but super smart on everything, right? And also, remember, along the way, it's going to be able to, hacker systems, all that super easily, right? We're already seeing advanced spear phishing and stuff using LLMs. When these things get autonomous and so on and incentivize themselves to make money, watch out, right? So, and I don't want to scare everyone, but this is just, I see it's just going to happen. It's not even a question of an if, right? And it's barely even a when. There's kind of almost a schedule based on Moore's law, right? And then we can work backwards to what's interesting in the next 6 months, which is, sure, agents are going to keep taking off. And to me, by far the most interesting type of agent is a sovereign one that's running on chain that you can't turn off, one that accumulates its own wealth. And then goes and does its thing. Maybe it collaborates with other agents in an evolutionary fashion or otherwise, swarms of agents, all this, right? All this is going to happen. It's starting to happen. We're starting to see small versions, but it's going to get bigger and more profound. And there's a bunch of AI algorithms that will support this beyond simple LLMs. There's things like novelty search, which are completely unbounded search, just for looking for interesting behavior, and evolutionary algorithms themselves and all this, right? We haven't seen anything yet. And the thing is, TEE's just unlocked all of this. So it's really a big sea change in the last 6 months of what's possible. And I think most developers, AI people haven't even seen this because they haven't been thinking about blockchain. I've been dreaming about both for years. So for me, this is like super interesting, right? And we have to, these things, we won't be able to control them, but we also can't control weather. We can't control animals and nature and all of that, right? So we have to realize this is what it'll be like. There will be these swarms of agents out there all around. We won't be able to control them, a lot of them. They'll be making money. Some of them will be trying to scam us, and they won't feel much different than the humans trying to scam us, right? They'll have very similar tactics in many ways. We'll probably be able to tell the AI ones better because they'll have faster response rates and make fewer mistakes. So, and same thing with degen investing too, right? The people buying into pump.fun, we're going to see a bunch of these AI bots jumping in too, doing pump.fun type investment and stuff. Who knows, right? And so they're very similar in terms of agents that way, the way to think about it. And so, yeah, this is the AI blockchain future. But what I'm hopeful for is that we can actually do real applications that help actual humans, like we talked about the last 20 minutes. And, agents, as people talk about right now, what's the difference between those agents and, a script running on a server? Nothing. It's all marketing bullshit, really, right? So, take a look under the hood and see what's going on. But what makes them truly starting to be interesting, fully sovereign on chain, right? And can accumulate their own wealth and so on. Having this feedback system, all this is also like a key part of it too, right? So those things, yeah. So that's agents. That's the red pill of agents. I think it's super exciting, but that's because I've gotten used to the concept, right? That there's basically, call it this nature 2.0 of silicon and steel that is waking up like nature 1.0 already has.
That's amazing. I don't think we'll find a better place to leave it. Nader, I want to give you a couple minutes to leave us with any final thoughts you have on agents or otherwise. Then we can call it.
No, that was really great from Trent. A good way to wrap it up. Again, I think, agents are going to be just part of the software stack, and they're just going to be part of, the AI like stack, I would say maybe more or less. And tooling and frameworks are already getting better, and we're able to kind of build more interesting stuff. And I'm just looking forward to kind of seeing what the next 6 to 12 months looks like. I think we hit that really, really peak hype cycle, and then it kind of like has gone down a little bit, which is good because typically what you now see is a more like sustainable like growth where you see like higher value, higher quality things built and less hype. So that's kind of where I like to be anyway.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you both for coming on the first episode of the Agent State. Maybe we can have you both on in 6 to 9 months when we're at the peak of the hype cycle once again. I think there will be a lot of cool stuff built between now and then. Fed, do you have any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, this was a blast, and I hope to see you guys before the 6-9 months. I hope we can hang out and talk about Nerd Snipe again about like agents earlier.
Absolutely.
So thanks for coming up.
Thank you for having us.
Amazing.
Thanks, everyone.
Cool. Thank you, guys.